The Silver Sword, Chapter 14, City of the Lost. It was the end of May when the train reached Berlin, after 9 days of stopping and starting, of lying up in sidings, of crawling along the battered track. The station was a shambles, but everyone was glad to escape from their cramped quarters. They swarmed out of the trucks and over the lines, some of them disappearing at once into the dusty ruins of Berlin. Most of them hung about or sat down on their luggage, hundreds of tired and disconsolate men, women and children, in the hope that they would be given food or told where to go. A few UNRWA workers appeared, shouting orders in broken German, trying to make them stand in a queue. Carts piled with bread pushed their way through the mob, and there was some ladling of milk out of vats for the mothers and babies. But this was the second refugee train that had come in that day, and there was not enough food to go round. Hungry and unfed, the family were directed to a transit camp not far away. They left the station shouting and laughing, for their spirits were high. Only a few weeks ago they were in Warsaw. 10 days ago Edek had not been found, and now they were all together and had covered a third of the way to Switzerland. They did not seem to notice that everything around them had been destroyed, that buildings that had stood for generations had been wiped out. Perhaps it was because they were too used to it. Warsaw looked no different. Perhaps it was because the sun was shining, the birds were singing, and Switzerland was just around the corner. "Nobody's going hungry," said Jan, and from the mischievous grin on his face, Ruth knew that he was about to show them he had not lost his gift for sleight of hand. Out of his shirt popped a long, cigar-shaped loaf of bread. They all sprang to catch it, but Jan held it high above his head and ran across the road. There was a blaring of horn, a screeching of brakes, and a jeep grazed his pants. A voice shouted some insult at him in a language he did not understand. Turning, Jan looked up into the moustache of a British officer. He made a long nose at it, and in a leisurely manner finished his crossing of the street. The officer pretended not to notice, and waved his driver on. Each party promptly dismissed the matter from his mind, but they were to meet again soon, and in the oddest of circumstances. Meanwhile, all interest was focused upon the loaf. The four sat down in the rubble to make short work of it. "I bet it cost you a pretty penny," said Edek sarcastically. "I borrowed it when the cart came round," said Jan. "Oh, in Germany we call that organising," said Edek. There was more food for them at the transit camp, a disused cinema whose floor appeared to contain the entire population of Berlin. After 4 helpings of soup each, they were given blankets and straw-filled mattresses and ushered into a dark corner of the hall. Here, a seedy-looking flag and a scribbled notice on the wall indicated that they were in Poland. The electricity was not working, and the only light came from the hurricane lamp suspended from the balcony above. As far as they could see, the whole floor was carpeted with mattresses. They threw down theirs where they stood, in the no-man's land between Poland and Yugoslavia. This was to be their home while they were in Berlin. It was warm and dry and comfortable, and they were delighted, especially Bronya, who loved to hear Polish voices, as they made it feel like home. Next to her, she found a child of her own age, whose mother was as good as Ruth at telling stories and knew many folk tales that Bronya had never heard. In spite of the crowded conditions, all was quiet and orderly in the hall. Except at meal times, when they went up onto the balcony, people were content to lie about on their mattresses, smoking, reading, talking, playing cards. The night was so quiet that Edek felt ashamed of his coughing and tried to smother it in his blanket for fear of waking the sleepers. Then, in the early morning, when the first wakers were stirring, came an unexpected moment of panic. Someone shrieked near the entrance. People sat up, heaved off their blankets, stood up, craned their necks to see what was happening. There was a general movement towards the entrance, stifled almost at once by another in the opposite direction. A wave of bodies rolled inwards, and for a minute or two it looked as if there was going to be a stampede. Then, as abruptly as it had begun, the noise died down, and all was quiet again. "What was all that about?" said Bronya. "Here's somebody who can tell us," said Ruth, as an excited new arrival, jumping from mattress to mattress, landed 3 jumps away. "A chimpanzee escaped from the zoo!" the new arrival announced breathlessly. Jan was instantly alert. "That's nothing to be afraid of," he said. "I wish he'd come over here." "Thank the Lord the brute's taken itself off," said the man. "Oh," said Jan. If he had been told that Switzerland had been flattened in an earthquake, he couldn't have been more disappointed. Those Greeks threw their boots at it and a couple of hurricane lamps as well. They've got some sense. Stupid, said Jan. The chimpanzee will copy them and someone will get hurt. He was ready to continue the argument, but the Pole on the mattress opposite was reading out, or rather translating, from a German news sheet an article that had demanded all his attention. Chimpanzee escapes from zoo, he translated. At large since Monday evening. Bistro, the chimpanzee, who for some years has delighted visitors to the Tiergarten with his amusing antics, escaped from his cage on Monday night. He was seen to board a tram in the Adolf Hitler Strasse, where he bit one of the terrified passengers before alighting at the next stop. Police gave chase, but the animal climbed a derelict building and, from a dangerous perch high above the street, proceeded to throw bricks at anyone who approached. He was still there when darkness fell. A watch was kept on the building all night, but the animal must have given them the slip, for he was not there in the morning. There have been several reports of him since, many of them contradictory. The reader looked up from the news sheet and saw with some surprise that all Poland was standing on his mattress. Flattered, he continued, Bistro was one of the few animals to escape unhurt from the bombing of the Tiergarten. A highly intelligent and usually docile animal with a passion for cigarettes, he appears to have been much shaken by the months of bombing the city has endured. His keeper reports that he has been difficult to handle because of his melancholy and sometimes violent moods. Anyone who sees him is advised to do nothing to anger him and to report at once to the police. The crowd dispersed and the news sheet passed from hand to hand. Soon, somewhat the worse for wear, it disappeared into Yugoslavia. It's a good thing that Bistro took himself off, said Ruth, who had returned to her mattress. Jan would have saved us if he hadn't, said Bronya. Where is Jan? Said Edek. Jan's mattress was uninhabited. They looked for him, but he had vanished.